Shalom, this is Rabbi Sachs, and welcome to the Chai Academy, being broadcast live from the Chai Center. Get that out of the way. Today we are starting a new course, a new series, I should say, and it's going to be interesting personalities, interesting Jewish personalities, and the lessons we can learn from them. We just completed a series on the Holocaust, which was a few weeks long. And so I figured to bridge the two, the Holocaust series to the Jewish personality series, we'll begin with Elie, or Eliezer, Wiesel, Elie Wiesel. The so each class is going to be a standalone class, encapsulated. So Elie Wiesel will be about Elie Wiesel, tomorrow will be about somebody else, etc. So Elie Wiesel was born in 1928. He was born in Romania. He was born in the town of Sighet. Sighet is actually there Sigheter Hasidim, and because Romania is so close to Hungary, a lot of the Satmar Hasidim and the Sigheter Hasidim are basically very similar. So he was born in this town of Sighet. This town had 14,000 Jews, and when the Holocaust happened, it was completely emptied out, and only about 700 Jews survived. One of them being Elie Wiesel. What's interesting about Romania, where it borders on the Ukraine and borders on Hungary, in Sighet, by the way, they speak a few different languages. They speak Romanian, they speak Hungarian, they speak a little bit of Ukrainian, I'm sure Russian influence. What's interesting about this neck of the woods is that the deportations that took place because of pressure by the Nazis, by the Romanian Hungarian authorities, happened much later than everywhere else. So the Jews in Sighet, the Jews in Romania, and Hungary for that matter, they were pretty safe until 1944, whereas other deportations began as early as 1941. This didn't happen until 1944. So if they could have survived like 1 year, they would have survived, but it didn't happen that way. Elie Wiesel's mother came from a very famous Hasidic family, Vishnitz Hasidim in particular, and her mother's maiden name, if I remember, was Feig, Feig. His father was not from a Hasidic family. His father was from a traditional kosher Orthodox family, and he once remarked that he learned his faith from his mother, and his caring and compassion and humanistic approach from his father. Elie Wiesel was one of four, I should say. So he had Beatrice was his older sister. Hilda, I think, was an older sister. Tzipora was a younger sister. So he was the boy, and he had three sisters. And his mom, dad, and Tzipora, his younger sister, were killed during the Holocaust by the Nazis in the camps. In 1944, by the deportations, Elie was 15 years old. So he wasn't, a 9-year-old kid or a 7-year-old or a baby. He was 15 years old, and they were sent to Auschwitz. And from there, they were sent to. From Auschwitz, they were taken to which was in Poland. They were taken to Buchenwald, which was in the Wehrmacht district in Germany. It's interesting. He in his book he writes that in 1944, when there was a Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and remember, Romania was still safe from deportations. Jews were living their lives, couldn't have been comfortable. There was anti-Semitism, but they weren't being deported, they weren't being systematically killed, and etc. But he writes that his mother was very angry at the Warsaw Ghetto Jews that were making the uprising. And the mother said what many people felt at that time. Ugh, what are they doing? Why are they making such trouble for themselves? The war's nearly over. Just saplanut, patience. The war is over. If you fight the Nazis, you have a chance of getting killed. But the war's nearly over. And that was the mindset. That was the mindset of his mom. And she wasn't the only one. So when the deportations took place in Budapest and Sziget and these other places, it was like shock. The war was over. And it's only because it was the last year of the war was that deal struck between Rudolf Kastner and Eichmann as far as saving the Jews of Lodz, is because it was the war machine needed money. And so the Nazi war machine, listen, I'm sure the Allies needed money as well. So the deal was struck because this wasn't 1941. It wasn't 1940. It wasn't 1942. This was 1944. So anyway, they were taken to Auschwitz, where they were killed. His mother and Zipporah were killed very early on. He in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, and he took Oprah to Auschwitz, but he told her that his main push to survive Auschwitz and then Buchenwald was because he knew if he died, his father would die shortly thereafter. So he said that my push to survive was to keep my father alive. Turns out his father was killed. His father was beaten and killed in the camps. And he told Oprah that he was actually embarrassed. He was humiliated that a son, and remember he was 16 at that time, could not stand up and save his father. And he was just humiliated was the term he used. He was liberated in 1945 from Buchenwald, and from there he went to France. He went to with 100 boys. Remember, he was an Orthodox kid and kept kosher. So about 100 boys were moved to a kosher boarding place, and it was just north of Paris, like 22 miles or 25 miles, 30 kilometers north of Paris. And he grew up in Paris, close to Paris. He went to the Sorbonne, where he studied journalism, etc. And he actually became a journalist in France. When he was in France, he covered the bombing in 1948, I believe, or was it 1945? I'm not sure what it was. 1946, the King David Hotel. I think he went to Israel in 48, but I think it was 1945. He covered the bombing of the hotel, and we discussed this in our Israel series. So he covered the bombing, and when he learned about Ben Gurion, he learned about the Irgun, and he learned about the people just trying to get the British out of power, because they had quotas, and when he learned about it, he actually tried to join the underground. He tried to join the Irgun, but he was not successful. He went to Israel, and as a journalist for a newspaper that's still around today called Yediot Achronot, and he became the Yediot Achronot roving international journalist. And he covered a lot of the Israel turmoil in the early years, the independence, the bombings, and the fight with the British and the fight with the Muslims. I'm sure he did covered the story of the Atelier, the Exodus, the ship, etc., etc. He never spoke about the Holocaust for 10 years. He didn't say a word about what he witnessed. And remember, he was a young adult. He was 15, 16 years old by the time he got out, and he didn't say a word. And it was only due to a friendship with another journalist and another somebody who was an award-winning journalist by the name of I remember his first name anyway, Francois, and Montreal or something like that, and it was Francois told him that you need to talk about it. And he says, "You're a great writer, Elie, do something." So he wrote a book. It was a 900-page book. I just wrote a book. It's 250 pages, 75,000 words. This is 900. And the book was called Und der Welt hat geschwiegen. And the world was silent. It was translated into French. It was translated into a couple different languages. He then wrote a synopsis, a shortened version, and he called it Night. Very famous book, translated into 30 languages, and while it started off slow at first, they say that the book Night, should only happen to my book, has sold 10 million copies. Of course, Night was his eyewitness account and his feelings of what happened during this darkest time, nighttime, of the Holocaust. And it was he wrote a trilogy, but Night was about the what exactly the Jews and he led through, the indignity and the murder and the humiliation and the just indiscriminate killing and lack of respect for human life. It made such a profound impact on him, the negative, that he turned it into a positive. He decided, once he wrote his book, that he is going to be on the forefront of human rights. And in 1955, he came to the U.S., and then he started to become an activist. While, yes, he was a professor in college, and he was an author, he wrote many books, 30 works of nonfiction. But he also was very instrumental. He was a founding member of the U.S. Holocaust Museum. He together with a partner, he founded Moment magazine, which was a magazine tackling Jewish issues. He became a speaker, a sought-after speaker. He gave the commencement addresses at different colleges and universities. Once again, 90 honorary doctorates. 90 universities honored him with honorary doctorate degrees. He received the Congressional Gold Medal for his activism. He fought apartheid. He stood up for Darfur. He stood up for any time there was an injustice in the world. He was there. He was on the forefront. And the injustice, by the way, could have been done even very subtle. One was something that propelled him into the limelight is President Ronald Reagan. When he was president, I think it was in 82, 83, maybe later. I don't know. President Reagan, I'm trying to think when it was. It may have been 85. President Reagan was planning on visiting the Bitburg Cemetery in Germany, West Germany. Now, Bitburg Cemetery is a mixed bag. It has, United States, United States heroes that were killed during the war, but it also had a nice chunk of Nazis buried there. So Elie Wiesel, he made an impassioned speech to Reagan, telling him you don't belong there. You don't belong in Bitburg. Don't give that place honor. Do not. You belong in the visiting the cemeteries, right? Visiting the cemeteries, in the military cemeteries, and in the veteran cemeteries. You don't belong in Bitburg. And while Reagan was very moved, Reagan, in my opinion, made an error, and he still went to Bitburg. Wiesel followed him to Bitburg, and that was like a compromise that Bitburg, that Wiesel could speak after Reagan. Before Reagan, I don't remember. I do remember him speaking at the cemetery. He was, as I said, given a congressional gold medal for his activism, and for the very first time in his life, in 2009, he returned to Hungary, where he addressed the Hungarian parliament for the very first time, by the way, since the war. There were 10,000 people in attendance. The prime minister, or the president, premier, or whatever his name is, whatever his title is, he was there. 10,000 people, and he spoke. Standing room only crowd, and they gave him the cross, the medal, the highest honor that country could give. What's interesting is that in 2012 he gave it back. It's called, I think, the Hungarian Cross. His friend Francois also got the cross, by the way, and he gave it back. He says, you know what? The Hungarians never took full responsibility for the Holocaust, for what happened, and even now, they're not really, they like to sweep it under the rug. He says, I can't in good conscience keep this medal. Elie Wiesel was very opposed, as I was, as most, I think, people with common sense, with the Iran deal. He says to give the Iran, right, and so me, you can dismiss, but Elie Wiesel, this is a man who's seen it all, and this is a man that was very involved. He said it's a huge mistake giving Iran nuclear capabilities, and that was one of his last things, because he died in 2016, and this Iran deal was happening 2015, and he was very, very opposed to the Iran deal. He felt it would just be a human rights nightmare, and it would create tremendous loss of life. It would create a Holocaust, and he was very impassioned, but he was ignored. He was ignored, which is too bad. I think if his legacy says anything, that Iran deal should not happen even now. Right, so it was stopped for a while, and now the talks are resuming. To me, it's such an error in judgment. It's frustrating. There's a story told about him, and it may be, is it a substantiated story? I'm not sure, but it's an interesting story. Is that he didn't want to have kids. He got married late. He didn't want to have kids, and he used to have correspondence with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and and he used to joke around with the Rebbe. I'm not a Lubavitcher, I'm a Vishnitzer. You can give me advice, but I don't have to take it from you. Anyway, the Rebbe told him, cut it out and have kids. Like, get married and have kids. And eventually he did. And he had one child, Elisha Wiesel. Elisha, in Times Square, there was a rally the other day, a pro-Israel rally, because of the war that just ended with Hamas against Israel, and the outgrowth of that war of anti-Semitism. And Elisha Wiesel spoke. Elie Wiesel made a foundation, founded a foundation that helped fight prejudice, and he took a salary from that foundation. Sadly, towards the very end of his life, his foundation was being overseen by a fellow by the name of Bernie Madoff. And Elie Wiesel lost his life savings, lost his foundational money, any salary that was being taken from there, and made off with over $15 million. So here's a man that suffered greatly, and he was such an accomplished person, only to be taken advantage of by Madoff. Now they're both in heaven. Hopefully they're both working it out. I say heaven. I don't know where anybody is, but hopefully that they worked it out, and Madoff has paid him back. What an interesting guy. He had a. It's interesting. He wrote many books on the Holocaust, but in his later years, his speeches were more about Judaism, Talmud, and one speech that I attended at the end of his discussion, which was not on the Holocaust, which is sort of about his thoughts on life, it ended with him singing a song. Now, when he sung his song, first of all, he had mad hair. I don't know what that was all about. I guess a trademark. Einstein did the same thing. Maybe just very wise and smart. And people are also egocentric. They have idiosyncrasies when it comes to the hair. I'm not sure, but when he finished his lecture, and before he stood up, he sung a song, and the song was Ani Mamin, I believe. I believe in the coming of Mashiach. Even though he may tarry, even though Messiah may tarry, I anticipate his arrival at any time. When he sung the song, coming from him, an elderly man, survived the Holocaust, dedicated his life to humanity, you could hear a pin drop. There was not a dry eye when he gave it live. And while some people, the lecture went over their head, not the song. And he sung it, and he looked down, and he was moving with his hands as he was singing. And then when he finished, he goes, no. And he stood up, and he got a rounding applause. It was appreciative applause, because that spoke more volumes than his lecture. What a fascinating man. He was morals, values, and I consider myself lucky, honored to have met this individual who has such an impact and effect on so many. He literally traveled the world in order to preach humanity, and sometimes with deaf ears, but I think what he accomplished is he brought back what the Nazis took away from us. He may not have brought it all back, the human dignity, etc. But just meeting a man like that was enough to restore one's faith in humankind. One may thank you for listening. Couple things. You may go to the youtube.com and the Chai Academy if you would like to hear any of the previous classes, courses, etc. You may also go to thechaicenter.com/academy. Today's a big day for me personally, as my book is the first official day of it being published. If you wish to order the book, there's no money in this. It's just an interesting read. There's no money for me. I'm sure there's money for Amazon. It's thechaicenter.com/book, and you may you'll be honoring me with ordering the book and write a review, and rabbi at thechaicenter.com if you have any feedback, etc. God bless. Be well.